Yo guys! It's your friend here, bringing you another awesome Naruto what if tale. Which is, without wasting your time, let's start the fanfic. What if Naruto built a time travel harem with Kushina Uzumaki, Hinata and Sakura? A young boy, very young, is going to be among the latter because of an event that he had no control over. And he is going to use his wrath to do something that the village he lives in has never done: protect the weak and the poor. This is where our story begins. Midnight. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The sound of wood being struck hard and repeatedly by something. One may assume that it was the same material, others would contradict and say that metal was being used, but those who were of the fighting world knew at that sound was. It was the sound of determination to be recognized, to never be seen as weak again, to achieve the power needed to reach one's goals and dreams. It was the sound of flesh and bone striking wood. If one focused enough, they would be able to hear more than just flesh striking wood. They would hear bones break, sweat dripping, and the heavy panting that is proof of several hours worth of training. The flesh being stressed for such long periods of time that it has begun to peel away and reveal the flesh that lies underneath the dead skin. And yet, they continue to strike, the wood that has been made smooth because of all the hours and strikes put in. The only other sounds would be the painful groans that also reveal great determination that covers most of the pain. Where were those sounds coming from? They were coming from a section that is known as the Forest of Death that lies in the village known as Konohagakure, or the village hidden in the leaves. One may be surprised to find what was making those sounds. Normally, one would expect to find a trained fighter, a cold-blooded killer, or a merciless slaughterer. However, the sounds were coming from none of those. Instead, they were coming from a young boy no older than the age of 10. The young boy had spiky sun-kissed hair with red streaks that was matted down with sweat and looked more red than yellow because of what looked like splotches of blood. The rest was tied in a ponytail that reaches to the middle of his back using a small black rope. The young boy had dazzling blue eyes that were filled with life, and yet, also depicted horror and tragedy along with abuse and neglect. Some unique features he has are the 3 whisker marks on each cheek and the slightly elongated fangs that peeked from underneath his lips. It was as if he had gained the traits of a feline or a fox. He had such a well-built body despite his age, having an 8-pack and muscles that not only showed strength but speed as well. His fists were wrapped in bandages all the way to the middle of his forearm. A thick stain of blood could be seen around the knuckle region and progressively growing with each strike upon the wood. A pair of black hakama pants were what covered his body from the waist down, and the right leg of the pants were torn from the end of the shin. Wrapped around his naked right leg were bandages that those too had splotches of blood. Laying on the ground nearby was a black, hooded, sleeveless jacket that had red marks traveling down the back and torso, and red fur lined the hood. He was unrelenting in his continued strikes upon the massive tree that lied in the forest that had dents and cracks that revealed the power behind his strikes. His strikes seemed to hold no form but were instead a mix of fighting styles from the old times such as Muay Thai, Judo, Taekwondo, and Kyokushin karate, and many other forms of fighting, as well as the modern fighting style of the Goken. And yet, despite all of these fighting styles mixed together, he was able to incorporate these movesets to flow fluently like a stream of water. And could deal a great, if not deadly, amount of damage to an opponent. Left roundhouse kick, flying roundhouse kick, straight right, left knee strike, left cross, right knee strike, right elbow strike. Each strike incorporated with another move, and this move comes from a different fighting style. Each strike also dealt a considerable amount of damage to the trunk that was originally as thick as a grown Akamichi's arm when using their Buben Baika no Jutsu, but now the tree looked to be straining against its own weight due to now being half as thick from all of the strikes that have been done to it. The boy could feel it. He felt as his bones were broken down and then healing back together, his flesh tearing itself apart and then stitching back together, and his wounds opening and closing. CK. No ordinary human should be able to do this. Even an average ninja would be unable to heal this fast, unless there was someone who was regenerating those wounds for them. Each strike brought pain and progress into his body. However, no matter what agony his body felt, no matter how many times his muscles pleaded for him to stop, he just kept on going like it was all that mattered and would go against what he stood for. He had been doing this for so long that it was as if the pain had been numbed from being registered in his brain. He had learned to endure the pain, both physically and emotionally, anyways. It was even before he had begun his training a few years past. Those memories were the fuel that fed his undying desire to get stronger and no longer be seen as weak ever again. Flashback. Way back. The horrendous sound of flesh meeting wood in a gruesome display echoed throughout the alleyway. A sudden bone-chilling scream of an anguish-induced child followed next. It was heartbreaking to hear, but not to those who were of the cold heart. The sound continued in a horrendous unorthodox pattern, and the cries seemed to greaten with each contact. Pete, please, no more. The whimpering was so heartbreaking to hear. It was the whimpering of a child that had gone through the inferno and back. Ha! Chortled the brutal man holding the punishing stick, no more. Brats like you deserve this kind of beating. With another strike, the child cried out again in pain. Besides, a demon like you doesn't deserve pity. Go back to the hell from where you crawled from and leave the Yondaime's family alone. The noise of cries and whips echoed throughout the night, seeming to even reach the distant moon, as if begging for it to help. But not even the great ambassador of the night could provide him aid. He was left alone in the cruel pits of torment by a drunk villager. The man didn't even deserve to be called a villager. He was a sadist. Later that night, he was limping home, bleeding, with tears falling from his eyes. He could never understand why the villagers were so mean to him when he had done nothing wrong. He finally made it home, and like usual the lights were off, meaning his family was already asleep and hadn't even both read, wondering where he was. As he closed the door, however, a lamp was turned on in the living room, showing his father's neutral face staring at him with disappointment. Do you have any idea what time it is? His father asked him with a tone of subtle anger. No, he whispered, his throat feeling raw from all of the previous screams of agony. It is the middle of the night, which means your mother and sister are sleeping. His father told him with a slightly raised tone to show his anger. Which means it is too late for you to even bother coming back to this house. His father said. What would you do if your entering the house woke up your sister and prevented her from having the energy tomorrow for training? Quote. I don't know. He whimpered. Exactly. You don't know anything. Unlike your sister, you are nothing compared to her. She is the child of prophecy. She is destined to bring about peace to this world, but she cannot do that if her idiot, weakling of a brother wakes her up and prevents her from training. His father began yelling at him with rage, mentally applauding himself for activating the silencing seals in the living room beforehand. But I don't come back this late on purpose, Naruto whimpered from his father's anger. The villagers were. I don't care what the villagers do to you. His father interrupted. It doesn't matter what they do to you. You are not worth anything when compared to your sister. But he tried to say. Enough. His father shouted. Enough with these excuses. I have had enough of them. But there, he tried to say again. Silence. His father ordered. This will be the last night I let you come back to the house this late. From now on, if you are ever out this late again, you will need to find somewhere else to spend the night, for I will be locking the doors after a certain time. His father said, now go to your room and think about your actions. Quote. He stayed silent as he obeyed his father and headed to his room. Upon entering, he could see that as usual his room was barren save for a bed and dresser that held his clothes. He went to his bed not even changing and lied down to try and go to sleep, all while shedding tears. Within those tearful eyes, however, lied the fire of hate that began to burn up from each painful strike that went into him and each reminder that his family didn't care for him. These people, they were going to pay. They were going to pay for harming the innocent and poor, they were going to pay forgetting about him, he swore it with the life and hate boiled and raged within him. Flashback end. The mere thought about the past and his so-called family sent his blood boiling. His fists landed harder, and his rage boiled hotter. The tree he was striking on was beginning to cave deeper and had been marred with more of his blood. Then, with a mighty shout, he slammed his fist into the caved region of the tree, and it burst into splinters like a balloon. The tree was barely standing upright with the hollowed section he had created through enhancing his fist with chakra. Deadly chakra. Unlike most chakra, his was wild, untamed, ravenous, and vile. Whatever it struck, it was shown no mercy. Whatever got in its way, whether for pride, arrogance, or foolishness, it was beaten to point of near death. The tree was used for not only training, but for equipment in which the blonde had learned to craft through wit and gathered knowledge. That was the reason why it, and soon like its predecessors, it will be beaten to a pulp. BWACK. With one last solid kick, the tree was cut down. Thud. Followed by a large thud. Thud. And another thud, albeit softer than the last. The blonde looked at the sky with willpower and determination that contradicted his afflicted features. No matter how much the pain, he always healed up thanks to the very reason why he was hated, the Kyuubi no Yoko, in which resided in him. Being a Jinchuriki had its benefits just as it had its flaws. He took advantage of this and trained until every bone broke or every muscle tore. Much alike a green spandex wearing Junin and his soon-to-be genin. Random training ground in Konoha. A certain green spandex wearing, youth shouting Junin sneezed. It seems as though there is a fellow martial artist that is training just as hard as me. What a youthful spirit, shouted said spandex wearing Junin. I just died a little writing that sentence. Twitching eyebrow can be seen. Random bedroom in a random house in Konoha. A certain future spandex wearing, youth shouting duplicate sneezed in her sleep. Back to the forest. He was going to show them all, the reason why they should never have tested and forgotten Uzumaki Naruto. Timeskip. When Naruto woke up, he was unsurprised to see the sky as dazzling as it was when the sun shone down onto the earth, and down on him. Every bit of his body ached, but he was used to the pain and in pushing, no rocketing himself beyond his limits. This time, however, he couldn't move a muscle. It was as if his nerves were so numb they weren't listening to the orders his brain was giving him. He remembered Kurami, the Kyuubi no Yoko's name, often trying to get him to take longer breaks or more frequent breaks, but the blonde never listened and only continued to push himself. Only after a few months that voice vanished, and he couldn't remember the last time he passed out. It was only up until now. As he closed his eyes and allowed his mind to go blank, he never sensed the pair of light brown, pupil-less eyes staring at him curiously with a tinge of pink on their cheeks, from seeing his shirtless body, in the trees above before leaving to report her findings to the Oi's mother and sister. Mindscape. When he opened his eyes once again, the visage of his mindscape was revealed. The mindscape reflected the mental capability and emotional aspect of a person, and what Naruto saw was a beautiful array of mountains that stood tall across an everlasting sea of and the wide reaches of plains that ended at the sandy shores of a beach. The mountain he stood on was akin to the Rocky Mountains, tall, fresh, and yet it had greenery sprouting all along the mountain like spring with the snowy patches of winter. He remembered such beauty hidden behind his mind, he expected it to bloom brightly just like his strength. You always push yourself too far like the idiot you are, huh? The melodic voice made Naruto spin around, and immediately rose his arms to defend himself from a powerful roundhouse kick to his right temple. The force was powerful enough to make him skid back a couple yards before he could stop himself. When he brought his arms down, he looked and narrowed his eyes. It was a girl about his age. Unlike Naruto's toned and masculine body, the girl had a petite frame with slim abs and a soft, light skin tone. Her face was shaped softly and flawlessly like a glass figurine, possessing soft lips and beautiful crimson eyes to follow. Her hair was as red as the color blood, cut short with an out-of-bed look with a strand sticking out and framing their face and in between their eyes in which these locks and bangs barely touch the nose. She wore a pair of red kung fu pants with tattered ends similar to Naruto's and a red sleeveless kipao-style blouse with black trimmings and fastenings. Two things that stood out the most. Firstly, girl had fox ears on the top of her head, and secondly, she had 9 ferocious orange to black tails hiplashing behind her. Think a young Rias Grimoire with Tenten's style of dressing. Kurami, Naruto said in a low voice with his eyes sharper than the finest sword in all the elemental nations. Naruto had a question readied, but Kurami answered it before he could ask. All actions have their consequences, Naruto-kun, said Kurami softly, betraying the deadly look in her eyes. You ignored my advice and lost control of yourself and pushed your mind and body to its limit. What that caused was the weakening of the seal, and lo and behold. I'm here. As a matter of fact, I should thank you for doing what you've done. If it weren't for you pushing yourself so far from your limit, I wouldn't have tasted freedom for so many years. The personified Biju smiled, revealing her small fangs jutting from the underside of her lips. Now then, let me show you my gratitude. Zoom. Naruto's eyes widened up before he sidestepped just in the nick of time before Kurami could connect a palm strike with his torso. Kurami, despite normally being such a huge Biju, knew how to fight using martial arts. If it was anyone else, Kurami would have already killed them with that single palm strike by how fast and strong it was courtesy to her Biju status. The red-streaked blonde got into a stance of the left foot forward, right foot back, body turned slightly to the right, with his left arm in front of him ready to strike and his right arm kept close to his body while being bent vertical from the elbow down. You want to get strong, right Naruto-kun? Smiled Kurami before going into a stance. It was just like Naruto's stance. Well then, let me help you with that. The battle had begun, with Kurami and Naruto looking like they were both on even ends. However, Naruto was clearly being worn down by Kurami who didn't even look tired. In fact, she was smiling both in amusement and interest as Naruto countered and dodged her blows. It was as expected from her host. Powerful, daring, calculative, handsome, Naruto was much better than being the buffoon of a host he was before. As much as Kurami desired to be free again, staying with Naruto might not be as bad she thought. Naruto back-flipped to dodge Kurami's sweeping kick. Once he landed, he aimed for a roundhouse kick to the head which Kurami caught immediately. Naruto, with his reactions being sharper than ever, used his other leg to perform a backflip kick aimed for Kurami's chin. The personified Biju let go of Naruto's and avoided the kick by flawlessly leaning back. When Naruto landed, they exchanged blows once again, with each blow wearing out a fighter. As time passed however, that fighter wasn't Kurami. Naruto, despite his bones creaking, shot out with an elbow strike, only for it to be sidestepped before he received a palm strike to his abdomen. The blow was so strong, that it forced air out of the red-streaked blonde's mouth and made him hunch forward. Quickly, the personified Kyuubi no Yoko took Naruto down by placing her right leg behind her host's leg and pulling her own leg back while also pushing forward using his forehead. Down went Naruto with a loud thud. Kurami pinned him down by straddling his lap while using her tails to hold down Naruto's wrists and ankles. The red-streaked blonde realized that he was pinned and wouldn't be able to move unless his captor wishes it. In the past, it had been man to win against the Biju, but now it had been the Biju who had won against man. This is what happens when you push yourself too far. Naruto-kun, whispered Kurumi with her head down and eyes being shadowed by her hair. A frown on her face replaced the smile that lied her face. You grow weak instead of strong. You injure yourself while bringing no benefit, and you cause your enemies to triumph over you because you couldn't hold your ambitions in check. You would have been dead a long time ago, if it weren't for me. That was true. If it hadn't have been for Kurumi, he wouldn't have healed this quick and learned this fast. If it weren't for Kurumi, his entire body would have been paralyzed a long time ago with only his eyes and mouth being capable of movement. If it weren't for Kurumi, he would have suffered for many days and nights. And finally, if it weren't for Kurumi, he wouldn't have gotten this far in strength and training. You owe me, we both know that. Whispered the Kyuubi no Yoko as she made Naruto sit up using her tails. Naruto said nothing as he looked down, his eyes clenched shut with his teeth gritting in frustration, pain, and self-disappointment. His hands were being held behind his back by Kurumi's soft tails with her tails gently swaying back forth behind her back. Naruto was not going to be a fool and attempt to struggle, for who knows what Kurumi might do. What on earth do I owe you? Asked Naruto in a silent, growl-like way as he looked up at the still frowning Biju and his eyes widened upon the sight before him. She was crying. Kurumi had finally lifted her head and she showed that her eyes were filled with tears. Tears of sadness, but not for herself, he realized, but for him. I want you to take better care of yourself, Naruto-kun. Whispered Kurumi as she began to let the tears fall. I want you to take it easier after heavy amounts of training. Take days off of training to relax and recuperate. I want you to be stronger but not at the risk of killing yourself. She slowly raised her voice until she was yelling. But why do you care what I do to myself? Wondered Naruto, for he was confused. Why would the strongest of the Biju care whether he trained himself to the ground and passed out? Why would the strongest Biju care if he was doing more harm than good to himself? Isn't it obvious? Asked Kurumi rhetorically as she inched forward, slowly closing the distance between their faces. Alarms began to scream at Naruto by how close the personified Biju got. He couldn't react, he was still frozen from seeing her crying. It's because I love you, whispered Kurumi as she finally closed the distance between her lips and his. Naruto's eyes widened even more than before and his face turned red. He had no idea the strongest of the 9 Biju felt like this towards him. It was then he realized what everything was about, the fight, the tears, the requests for him to be easier on himself. It was because she loved him. Naruto, now realizing how much of an ass he had been, managed to snap himself out of his freezing phase and relaxed into the kiss, returning it. When Kurumi had finally connected her lips to his, she felt like she was on cloud 9. She had finally managed to kiss the one she had fell in love with. And, when Kurumi felt Naruto relax and return the kiss, she felt like she was in heaven because she had not only successfully confessed her feelings to the boy she fell in love with, but he also returned her feelings. Kurumi then released his arms when she felt him return the kiss, and she then felt him cup her cheek with his left hand and held her waist with his right. They continued for what felt like hours but had actually been 2 minutes before the need for air became too much. They released the kiss and stared at each other's flushed faces while leaning their forehead on the other's, panting for air, all while smiling at each other. So, Naruto asked after a brief silence, what does this make us? He awkwardly asked after the brief silence. Kurumi giggled at the question. Well, most people would consider themselves a couple after something like this. She said. Naruto sighed in relief at that, as he was afraid this might have all been a prank. Well, I guess as your boyfriend, I should do a better job of taking care of myself in order to not make you worry. He said, which got the reaction of her face brightening and then squealing and pouncing on him. He stayed there on the floor, letting her hug him while constantly whispering, thank yous, at his response to her previous requests. So, when do you think I can get up? He asked. Why? Don't you like holding me? She asked cutely while tilting her head slightly to the side. No one can possibly be this cute. Naruto mentally shouted before replying, yes, but it feels weird to be holding a girl whose body looks my age. Quote. Kurami's face took on a mischievous expression when she heard that. Oh tilde, so as long as I don't look like a child it's okay to stay here? She asked while grinning mischievously. He was confused by that. What do you mean? Isn't this how you naturally look? He asked, confused by what she meant by that. It was now Kurami's turn to laugh. Silly Naruto-kun. She said, with a teasing tone that made Naruto worry, all while beginning to stand up. You didn't honestly think this is what I really look like, did you? She asked while still grinning. Naruto didn't have time to respond because in the next second, poof. Kurami was covered in a puff of smoke, and when it cleared, Naruto witnessed the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Where Kurami once stood was longer a 10-year-old looking girl. What stood there was a drop-dead gorgeous vixen. Kurami stood there with her huge, gravity-defying double F cup and perky nipples stood proudly on her chest, blatantly for Naruto to see. Her curvy, well-built body accompanied by her plump, mouth-watering thighs. Her heart-shaped face was accompanied with pink, porcelain-like lips and beautiful, orange-red slitted eyes. She had 3 whisker marks on each cheek similar to Naruto's but being much more prominent. Her hair had grown up to her upper rear with the addition of 2 braided locks framing on either side of her face. Well, is this better Naruto-kun tilde? She asked while leaning forward with her arms crossed underneath her bust making them look bigger than they already were. Naruto went red-faced, wide-eyed and felt his throat dry at the sight while clamping his left hand over his face to stave off the nosebleed that threatened to break through. I mean, why you? Naruto stuttered while still staring at Kurami's naked body. Kurami giggled at his reaction and decided to take pity on the poor boy before he passed out in his mind as well. Poof. In another puff of smoke, Kurami can now be seen wearing a loose, red, kimono-style blouse with black trimmings and no sleeves, red kung fu pants with the kanji, hu, on both thighs. Meaning fox, and black kung fu shoes to finish. Naruto sighed in relief upon seeing this with his cheeks still containing a tinge of red. Naruto then looked back at Kurami with such determination that it made her blush. Well, since we are now going to be going out, how about we find a way for you to get out of my mind and into the real world? Naruto said, and that made Kurami brighten with a blush on her cheeks. Actually, Naruto-kun, I have a method to get out of here. Kurami said, in a tone that, had Naruto caught, would make him extremely nervous and blush, while walking towards him. Really? That's great. What do yo? Naruto began to say before he stopped and yelped in shock and surprise when Kurami came up to him and bit his neck. Suddenly, Naruto started to black out, and the last thing he felt was heat rushing through his neck before vanishing from his mindscape. Forest of Death. When Naruto woke up, the first thing he realized was that he felt very heavy for some reason. And not from the soreness of his body. He looked down and there, lying on his torso was Kurami. She was holding onto him like a lifeline that would disappear if she let go. He probably would have let her hold onto him a while longer if he didn't have things to do today. Rami, he began, can you, let me up? Kurami for her part, snuggled closer and held him even tighter, which began to cause a sense of discomfort for him. Pet me, requested Kurami as she used one of her tails to gently grab hold of one of his arms and guide it to her head. Silently chuckling, Naruto moved his arm so that he was now petting Kurami in between where her ears were. Kurami began to sigh and moan in pleasure at having Naruto pet her. It almost felt as good as kissing him, almost. Which reminds her. Kiss me. Upon this request, he paused in her petting and looked down at her with a raised eyebrow and a slight smirk. She felt this and looked back at him with a big smile on her face, with an expectant look in her eyes. Seeing this look, he chuckled again, then cupped her chin using between his thumb and index finger, tilted her up, and softly kissed her on the lips, which she was more than happy to return. After their kiss, she let him get up while also getting up herself. Once the red-streaked blonde got up, he began to pop and crack his bones. The way they crunched was immensely satisfying as it briefly and quickly took away all of the stress from the previous day's workout. When Naruto cracked his neck to the side, he remembered when Kurami bit him on his neck. He instinctively touched his neck and found the bite mark. When he found the mark, he instinctively began to rub it, which got a chuckle out of Kurami. Kurami, Naruto began. Kurami answered, showing he had her attention. Why exactly did you bite me? Naruto asked. To get out of the seal silly. Kurami answered with a childlike innocence that seemed to add to her sex appeal. I know that, but if what's simply pushing your chakra through, then you could have simply held onto me and done it like that. Naruto said, still confused on the need for the bite. Oh. Kurami exclaimed in understanding of what he was asking, well, that's easy. I marked you as my mate. She replied again with childlike innocence. Naruto whirled around in surprise. Mate. Naruto exclaimed. Well, yeah. Foxes don't having boyfriends and girlfriends. We have mates. Kurami explained, giggling at his surprised, wide-eyed expression. Doesn't that basically mean we're married now? Naruto asked, now beginning to calm down. Yup. Exclaimed Kurami, but we're not, officially, married until you mark me too. Kurami further explained, while turning around and walking as if conducting a lecture. Naruto raised an eyebrow and smirked at this information, really Tilda? Naruto asked, beginning to come up behind Kurami without her knowledge. Yup. And that is done by you biting my neck as well. But don't worry, I don't expect you to do that right now. Kurami continued explaining until she turned around and bite. Naruto surprised her by biting her neck as well, by using his elongated fangs that he got by channeling chakra into them. Oh. Kurami moaned in surprise and pleasure at the feeling of Naruto biting her neck. Once Naruto let go, he grinned at her with his signature fox grin. Well. Naruto exclaimed, looks like we are now, officially, married. Quote. Kurami could only blush at this, so shocked by the turn of events. While Naruto looked around for his jacket that was somewhere in the area, Kurami was having some thoughts about this turn of events. Did he just, ooh. And then he just grinned like it was something simple and easy. I want him. I want him bad. And with mating season coming soon, I'll most likely drain him dry unless I get some relief before mating season. As Kurami thought the last part, she turned to look at Naruto, who had finally found his jacket and currently dusting it off. He better give me some relief even if we don't go all the way, or else I'll jump him and have my way with him. Single quote. While this was happening, neither Naruto nor Kurami had any knowledge of a creature watching the two. This creature looked like a spider, but not just any old spider. This spider looked to be made of gold while looking mechanical instead of organic. It had 8 blue eyes that looked on in curiosity. Its body seemed to have a flowing wind design. It seemed to be looking at both Kurami and Naruto, but if one paid attention, they would see it as solely staring at Naruto. Interesting. It spoke while still staring at Naruto and recognizing the energy that he seemed to give of, could it be? Meanwhile at the Uzumaki household. While Naruto was going through his ordeal with Kurami in the Forest of Death, the owner of the light brown, pupil-less eyes was currently making her way through the grounds of the Uzumaki compound in a hurry in order to report her findings to her teacher. Eventually, she found her teacher in the backyard of the main house training her daughter in the way of the sword. There stood Kushina Uzumaki, mother to Naruto and Naruko Uzumaki, ex-Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko, and ex-wife of Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. She had fair skin, violet eyes, and the common red hair of the Uzumaki clan. She had a feminine build with curves in the right places. This is evident by her thin waist, wide birthing hips, and her F-cup. Her red hair, normally, reached down to her ankles with shoulder-length strands framing her face, all held with a black clip. Currently, however, she had her hair tied in a high ponytail using black-colored rope, similar to Naruto, with the shoulder-length strands of hair still there. She was currently wearing black shinobi sandals, black form-fitting pants, with her ninja pouches on her left thigh and behind her right hip. She had on the standard Konoha Junin flak jacket, while underneath, she had a black short-sleeved shirt, that was over a black mesh shirt. On her right arm were the two headbands for Konoha and Uzushiogakure that she normally wears. All of this shows that she's back on active duty of being a Konoha ninja. Currently, Kushina was training Naruto in her homeland's sword style, the whirlpool style, and was having great success. Naruto took to the sword just like her mother, and Kushina couldn't be any prouder. But then, while she was taking pride in her daughter, she remembered that she still did not know where her son was ever since she left Minato and the Namikaze estate. Flashback. The very same night that Naruto was told he will be locked out from now on, his mother, Kushina, had heard him come in and went to go see why he had come back so late. But then she heard her husband Minato talking and yelling at Naruto, and she was distraught at what she heard. She has always thought that family comes before anything, and when she met Minato, she had thought she found someone who she could be happy with and have a family with. But when she heard all of what was said, she quickly and quietly went back to bed, and pretended to be asleep when her husband came into the room. She heard grumbling in disdain about how Naruto was a weakling and would never amount to his younger sister Naruko, who was a ple minutes younger than Naruto. She couldn't believe that the man she had fell in love with could be so heartless to her child. And to say they will have to find shelter outside if they couldn't get home quick enough was appalling to her. The next morning, she went to Naruto's room, to talk to him and make sure he was okay. But when she got there, she was so frightened by what she found, she began to tear up. The room was barren, the dresser had been emptied and the window was open with the curtain flowing due to the gentle breeze that was let in through the window. When she saw this, she screamed. This got the attention of her daughter and husband. They both went to see what was wrong, and when they saw why she screamed and was currently crying, they each had different reactions. Naruko began to cry alongside Kushina while holding her. Minato, however, gained a neutral expression, believing that now that the weakling has left, he can better train the child of prophecy. He thought everything was going his way until Kushina stood up and glared at him with tear-filled eyes. She began shouting at him for not treating Naruto like the child he is and treating him terribly with neglect. After her rant, Minato's only reply was, "If he ran away, then that must mean he was weaker than I thought, and now I can finally train the child of prophecy the way I wanted to without that distraction." When Kushina heard this, she was livid. She told Minato that she would never let him train her daughter. And when he tried to argue that she couldn't do that because she was his wife and Naruko is his daughter as well, Kushina had finally had it. She let Minato know that she had heard all that he had told Naruto the previous night and that she was disgusted in who he had become and that she would be leaving him with Naruko to the Uzumaki compound where they will live, and when they find Naruto, they will welcome him with open arms whether he is weaker than Naruto or not. Minato was frozen stiff in shock. He couldn't believe this. His wife, the mother of his children, had just said she would be leaving him all because he wouldn't take care of a weakling. This was an outrage. He was not about to let all of these years of training his daughter go to waste over a weakling. As he was stuck in his thoughts, Kushina and Naruko packed up their belongings and were out the door. After they left, they heard Minato shout in anger and frustration that she could not do this to him. Immediately, following the shout, Minato came running out with a kunai in hand, planning on forcing Kushina to stay. However, he forgot that before she retired, her epithet was, the red-hot-blooded habanero, and so when he struck, he was not expecting to be suddenly looking up at the sky while feeling pain in his left shoulder. It took Minato a total of 2 seconds to realize what had happened. Kushina had moved so fast he hadn't seen her move, cut off his left arm at shoulder length, burned the wound shut, and knocked him on his back. Once everything had caught up to him, he shouted in pain while gripping the wound with his right hand in an effort to stave off the pain, only resulting in agitating the wound causing more pain. When he shouted, 3 Anbu suddenly appeared with weapons drawn. The Anbu that appeared were Snake, Dog, and Cat. Snake had violet, pineapple-shaped hair and the snake mask on their face, Dog had gravity-defying white hair and the dog mask on, and finally, Cat had long, straight, purple hair. Hokage-sama, what has happened? Dog asked, with a voice that clearly showed this was a male, while he helped the Hokage stand while also looking around for the danger along with the other 2. Anbu. Arrest Kushina Uzumaki for attacking the Hokage. Minato tried to order but instead of the collaboration of highs he should have received. All he got were the Anbu, turning to look at him, while all 3 tilted their heads showing they were confused. Why are we arresting Sensei? Came the voice of Snake and Cat at the same time, clearly indicating they were female. Because she just attacked me and cut off my arm. Or is the lack of my left arm not obvious? Minato yelled rhetorically. Is this true, Sensei? Asked Snake, while Cat looked at her teacher as well. Yes, but maybe he should have also mentioned that it was in self-defense when he came running at me and my daughter with a kunai for attempting to leave him in this kami-forsaken compound B. Because his mistreatment of my son has led to him running away and disappearing. Kushina replied with the shouting acute, yeah, in the background. Hokage-sama, is this true? Dog asked, while he and the 2 other Anbu frowned from behind their masks. So what if it's true? Minato shouted, as your Hokage, I order you to arrest her. At this the 3 Anbu shook their heads while sheathing their weapons. Dog replied, I'm sorry Hokage-sama, but unless she attacked you first, then we cannot do anything about what has happened to you other than take you to the hospital. Minato growled in anger at this, and glared at Kushina and said, this isn't over, Kushina. I will have my child of prophecy, and no one will get in my way. With that said, the 3 Anbu were about to leave but then Kushina said, Snake, Cat, can you wait for a moment? NT. Snake and Cat looked at each other before looking at Dog and all 3 nodded their heads before Dog left to the Hokage to the hospital, leaving the 2 Anbu with Kushina and Naruto. What is it Kushina-sensei? Snake asked, while both her and Cat looked at Kushina. Kushina frowned, can you 2 take off your masks so we can talk face to face? Snake and Cat looked at each other before shrugging their shoulders and taking off their masks revealing the faces that lied underneath. Once Snake took off her mask, it revealed a set of light brown, pupil-less eyes looking at Kushina with curiosity. She has lightly tanned skin, and a pair of soft, pink lips. This is Anko Mitarashi, former apprentice of Sanin Orochimaru, and former student of Kushina Uzumaki. When Kat took off her mask, it revealed a pair of brown eyes filled with curiosity that were focused on Kushina, fair skin, and soft red lips. This is Yugao Azuki, a fellow former student of Kushina Uzumaki. So, what can we help you with? Asked Yugao, as she was curious because normally Kushina would talk to them and ignore them leaving their masks on. This could only mean she was serious and needed a personal favor. I need both of you to help me find my son, Naruto. Begged Kushina, with eyes filled with tears and motherly love while on her knees. I will pay you and anyone you get to help you. Just please help me find my son. Quote. Enko and Yugao were surprised. They, in all the time they knew Kushina, had never seen her on her knees or crying for that matter. And the tone that she was speaking to them with was so heart-wrenching that they felt they were about to begin tearing up. They both moved to Kushina and held her, comforting her, with Naruto coming over to help comfort her mother as well. Don't worry about money, Kushina-sensei, said Anko, we will find him for you and make sure you are reunited with him. Quote. Yeah, agreed Yugao softly, we'll find him and bring him back to you. No. Exclaimed Kushina, surprising the two kunoichi, no. I don't want you to bring him back. I have faith that we will meet again in the future and that he will come home. Kushina explained upon seeing the accusing looks from the three other females there, what I want you to do, is report to me what you found, like where he is, how he looks, and what he was doing when you found him. Continued Kushina. Anko and Yugao both nodded in understanding, before Anko looked nervous about something which was not missed by Kushina. Is something wrong? Kushina asked, worry evident in her voice. Anko now had the attention of all three other females. Kushina had a look of worry along with Yugao and Naruto just looked curious. What if, started Anko, when we find him, he's dead? After Anko asked this question, there was a brief silence. During this silence, the tension in the air seemed to rise as Kushina's eyes were shadowed. Yugao looked between Anko and Kushina nervously, and Naruto looked to be on the verge of tears when she heard this question. This continued for a minute before Kushina sighed and looked straight at Anko. He won't be. Came the simple reply from Kushina. Well, started Anko, how can you be so sure? Because, Kushina answered, now looking up and revealing eyes with pure determination and faith, he is my son and if he's anything like me, then he will fight and survive. Kushina replied, with total faith that her son will be alive and well when he is found. Flashback end, Sum's question to the situation. The others agreed with Sum's question as they were just as confused, until Kushina looked at Anko with an expectant look. Anko found him, came the simple response. Upon hearing this, all the women focused on Anko who was looking like she was ready burst out with excitement. Really? The women exclaimed. Anko nodded her head with a big smile on her lips and said, yeah, I found him, came her response before she remembered how she found the target of their searches and blushed. Something that was not missed by anyone. Anko, how is Naruto? Kushina questioned, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Well, came the nervous reply, with Anko scratching the back of her head, he is doing fine if that is what you're asking. In fact, according to the fallen tree that lied on the ground nearby this morning, I would say he did seriously heavy amounts of training last. For several hours by the looks of it. Upon hearing he was alright, all of the women sighed in relief that he was doing alright. However, their interests were piqued upon hearing that Naruto had been training. He was training? Sum asked with very clear interest. Anko nodded her head and replied, yup. From what I saw, he was using a tree and had completely cut it down. Hitomi was the next to reply, cutting down a tree during training isn't that hard to do. What weapon did he use? However, the answer she got was something that none of them were expecting, especially not Kushina and Naruto. He didn't use a weapon from what I saw, and this wasn't just any old tree. Quote. What kind of tree was it? Asked Kurenai, now curious about the boys' training method along with Sum, Kushina, and the rest of the women there. Anko's answer surprised them all and filled Kushina with pride. It was one of the oldest, thickest, hardest trees in the forest of death. Quote. Upon hearing this, all of the women were amazed, because those trees could even handle the blast from an explosive note and keep standing with only a minor chip of bark as damage. While they were all amazed by this feat, Hana then remembered something. Hey, Anko. Anko and the rest looked at Hana, wondering what she was thinking. Yeah. Why were you blushing when you remembered that you found him? Silence. Complete silence. Then, all of a sudden all attention was focused on the currently bright red Anko. Quote. Well, Hana asked. Say, mumbled Anko. What? Yugao asked, now curious on what could cause Anko. Of all people to blush. No. Mumbled Anko again. What? Kurenai asked, now feeling very curious along with the rest on why Anko. Of all people would blush. Because he didn't have a shirt on. Shouted Anko. So, you're blushing because a 10-year-old was shirtless? Sume asked, questioning whether the Tokubetsu Junin should be around kids. Trust me when I say he looked like no 10-year-old any of us have seen. Anko replied, now earning everyone's interest again. What do you mean? What did he look like? Came the innocent question of Naruko. She was curious on what her older brother looked like. He looked like a god. Anko answered, he was easily over 5 feet, with an 8-pack that looked like they could crush stone, and muscles that could provide but weren't bulging to take away speed. He was wearing black hakama pants that had been torn on the right leg to show his leg up to just before his knee. And he had bandages around his leg from what I could see, as well as both arms up to the middle of his forearms, and they were covered in blue. Showing that he was having a serious training session. And his hair was blonde with red streaks, that at the time looked more red due to what I believe was splotches of blood, and had grew out to where he now ties his hair in a ponytail that reaches his lower back, all tied with a black rope like yours kushina, with fierce blue eyes and 3 whisker marks on each cheek and slightly elongated fangs. And laying nearby, he had a black, sleeveless, hooded jacket that had red marks trailing down the torso and back, with crimson-colored fur lining the hood. Anko described. As Anko was describing what Naruto looked like, each woman began imagining how he looked and all began blushing at the sight. Even Kushina and Naruko were blushing. Well, came the shaky reply of Kushina, who was still lightly blushing at the image, I guess we can get a better look at him when he goes to the academy for graduation. Replies of, yups, and, that's right, were passed around before they all settled on looking at Kushina, wondering what they were going to be doing, now that her son has been found. Kushina, realizing what they were wondering, began to think, before coming up with an answer. Why don't we all train together and we train our daughters together so that they can hopefully make a good impression on Naruto when we see him at the academy graduation. Quote. Time skip. 6 years. Over the past 6 years, Naruto has made tremendous progress. He is currently sleeping in his new home deep in the forest of death that is currently hidden, along with his presence and chakra, all thanks to Kurami. What? When you're sealed inside of Kushina Uzumaki, whose husband was Minato Namikaze, and both were seal masters, you're bound to learn a couple of things. Anyways, Naruto can currently be seen sleeping, and he has most certainly grown up. Naruto is now a little over 6 feet tall, currently the second tallest person in Konoha, just under Ibiki. He now has a crazy strong 12-pack, muscular arms and legs that provide both power and speed. Think Apachai build from Kenichi, the mightiest disciple. For reference, he has naturally tanned skin, showing all the time he puts into training. His hair still reaches down to his lower back and is still tied in a ponytail with black rope. He has 3 whisker marks on each cheek that have muscle. Why faded over time? Naruto-kun tilde, it's time to get up. You don't want to be late for graduation. Came the sound of a voice from outside his door. Upon hearing this, Naruto began to stir. He sat up and yawned, showing his still longer than normal canines. He scratched the back of his head before he opened his eyes to reveal the dazzling blue eyes that are filled with determination, life, and such an immense love, that one would become lost staring into them for too long. Alright, I'm up, Naruto said. Okay, and when you're done, breakfast is ready. The voice replied with a chipper tone. Alright, Naruto replied. Naruto got up when opened the door to head to the bathroom to shower and brush his teeth. Once that was done, he went back to his room and proceeded in getting ready and gather his clothes. He went down the stairs and was greeted to the sight of his mate, Kurumi, cooking some eggs for breakfast. Kurumi hadn't changed over the years and was still the lovable, flirtatious vixen that he remembered. "Good morning, Kurumi," Naruto said with a smile. "Good morning, Naruto-kun. I'm just finishing the eggs, then breakfast will be ready," Kurumi replied without turning around. "Focused on cooking the eggs. Alright, that's fine," Naruto said while taking a seat. After breakfast, Kurumi tilted her head to the side and asked, "So, are you ready for today?" Quote, "Absolutely," Naruto exclaimed, 100% confident that he will pass the test. "Alright. That's what I like to hear from my mate," exclaimed Kurumi, while her tail swayed excitedly, showing her excitement. "Well," Naruto began, as he began standing up, "I'll let you know how everything goes later." "Alright," Kurumi replied, "make sure to kick plenty of ass out there today." Naruto simply chuckled at Kurumi's antics, while waving back at her. Time skip. At the academy, parents could be seen everywhere waiting excitedly for when their children come out with their headbands showing they passed and are now ninja. One small group, however, was more than just mothers. This group was made up of Kushina Uzumaki, Sum Inuzuka, Makoto Uchiha, Hitomi Hyuga, Hana Inuzuka, Kurenai Yuhi, Yugao Azuki, and Anko Mitarashi. They were waiting for their children or sister or students depending on who you asked. While they were waiting, they were talking about who would graduate and be on what team. "So, who else do you think will pass?" Anko asked, as she had complete faith that Naruto and the rest would pass. "The Aburame and Nara for sure," came the reply of Kurenai. "Both will no doubt pass all three parts due to being trained in their respective clan jutsu and the academy jutsu." Quote, "The Akamichi and the Yamanaka will no doubt pass as well," Hana added. "That is very true, and that Haruno girl will pass, but that will mostly be due to her book smarts than the actually kunai, shuriken and taijutsu segments. She has, after all, only recently gotten out of her fangirl phase," added Sum, acknowledging the former fangirl. The rest agreed with their assessments before realizing that the area was quiet and that all of the adult in the area were looking in a direction. The women with blushes and lust in their eyes and the males with envy. When they all turned to the direction, the group also began to blush at the sight before them. Walking to the entrance of the school was a 16-year-old boy. They were 6 feet and 3 inches, making them the second tallest person in Konoha. They wore black hakama pants with red flames designed on the bottom of the legs, all held with a gold-colored rope. Tied around their waist was a black jacket with gold trimmings. On their clearly muscular torso was an open, black, sleeveless vest that had gold trimmings. He also has bandages wrapped around his arms from his forearms to his hands, and instead of shoes he wore bandages wrapped around from his feet to his shins. He had blonde spiky hair with red streaks, all tied in a ponytail with a black rope and reach his lower back with several bangs framing his face. He had dazzling blue eyes like sapphires that radiated confidence and determination. A calm smile that told everyone he had confidence in himself. And a unique feature were the 3 whisker marks that lies on both cheeks. Think Natsu's vest from Fairy Tail Season 1, Asura's pants from the video game, Asura's Wrath, Apachai's style of wrappings from Kenichi, the mightiest disciple, and his hairstyle looks like bands from 7 Deadly Sins but is not blue. Upon seeing the whisker marks, the Kushina's group froze in shock at realizing who this red-streaked blonde god was. Naruto. The group exclaimed mentally so as to not draw attention to themselves. Naruto made his way to the academy doors and went inside. While Naruto went inside, the group were having thoughts about the Naruto they just saw. "Oh my god. My baby boy has gotten so big and handsome," thought Kushina with pride and a blush, surprised at her son's growth, "and he looks so strong too. How much of my son's life have I missed?" Kushina thought, feeling sad at the last part. Oh my. That was Naruto. Damn. He doesn't look anything like when I saw him when he was younger or in the forest. Thought Anko, surprised by how much Naruto changed from when she would rescue him from the villagers and when she saw him in the forest 6 years ago. Single quote. I wonder how big he down there. Anko thought pervertedly with a blush. Geez. What did that kid eat for breakfast for all these years? Rocks. Mentally exclaimed Sum, and that was Naruto. Damn. And that feeling when he passed by felt like that of grade A alpha material. Sum thought with a blush when she focused on when he passed by. Wait, what's that feeling? Sum began thinking as she looked down and realized she was wet. What the hell? I'm wet by him just passing by. And he wasn't even doing anything. Realized Sum with her blush getting darker, once she saw she had a darker spot by her nether regions. Wait. How's Hana? Exclamation mark single quote. Sum thought worriedly before looking at her daughter and saw the state she was in. Currently, Hana had a massive blush on her face and had fallen to her knees, quivering at the feeling of such a strong alpha passing by, while still staring at the academy doors with dazed eyes. Holy! Exclaimed Sum in surprise at realizing that her daughter had just entered pseudo heat by Naruto just passing by. I have to take her home so she can get a hold of herself or else she may just jump his bones when we all go talk to him. Sum planned, before looking down at herself again and thinking, me too actually. While Sum was planning on handling her daughter and herself, Hana was going through her own issues. Alpha, must, mate, with, Alpha, Hana thought robotically, wait. What am I thinking? I can't just mate him. Even though he has such big muscles, and such perfect abs, and that strong alpha aura tilde, Hana thought, before realizing she was getting deeper into her lust. Hana looked over at her mother who looked at her and nodded before they quickly body flickered, with their Ninken partners following close behind, home to get control of themselves. That was Naruto. How? Question mark single quote. Kurenai mentally exclaimed. He looks nothing like what Anko described all those years ago. Kurenai was in complete disbelief at the Naruto that she just witnessed. She had been thinking that he wouldn't have changed much, but she was wrong. He's so tall. And those arms. They look strong enough to break rocks. Kurenai exclaimed in her head, before suddenly. I want to eat off those abs. Her thoughts took a turn to the gutter and she began blushing brightly at the memory of his abs. Single quote. I want him. Thought of brightly blushing Makoto, I want him bad. I want him to hold me in those arms. I want him to rub my body with those big hands. Continued a still brightly blushing Makoto. I wonder if down there is big too. Single quote. Single quote. Hitomi's mind was completely blank as she was blushing up a storm, except for one thought, big. For you see, Hitomi used her Byakugan when Naruto was walking by and got glimpse of his so-called, little friend. Only thing was, it wasn't so little. Come on. We all know that they would use it to check out people through their clothes. Single quote. I want to rub those abs, thought Yugao. I want to rub them, lick them, and eat off of them. Single quote. Yeah. Her mind's gone. Inside classroom. The classroom was filled with some light, but excited chatter. All the students were grouped together with their friends talking to each other. But, one group had the attention of everyone else. This group was made up of all the clan heirs save for one people. Within this group however, were 5 people who were known as the next generation of Ice Queens. Those people are known as Naruko Uzumaki, Yakumo Kurama, Hinata Hyuga, Satsuki Uchiha, and Kira Inuzuka. These 5 were inseparable ever since they were kids and all began training together. Naruko had changed over the years. She still had her straight, long red hair, only currently it wasn't in a ponytail and instead was held in a braid over her shoulder. She had soft pink lips, violet eyes that held strength and kindness in them. She was wearing a bigger, sleeveless version of her old battle kimono, only now it hugged her now D-cup. She wore black form-fitting pants with her dual pouch still on her right thigh and had black shinobi sandals. She earned the title of Red-Headed Ice Queen because of her beauty and always turning down dates. A new addition to her outfit was the katana that currently were tied to her hip. It was approximately 30 inches in length with the blade portion being approximately 23.5 inches long. The guard on the sword was bronze and in the shape of a dragon. The sheath had a dragon design as well. It has a red-colored sheath with a gold dragon. The grip is white with the actual wrapping around the handle being red. Hanging from the pommel tied with a string was a metal flower charm. However, it was not always like this and had in fact been just a small orb of metal until it was in Naruto's hands. That was when it changed into the sword it is now. That had always been a strange occurrence for Naruto and her mother. The sword had just one day arrived on their door and with a note that read, for the daughter to reforge the connection to the lost son. Quote. Until Naruto had actually grabbed the sword and it changed, they had been stumped on what the note meant. But now, they definitely knew who the lost son was and they would reconnect with him. They even planned that if he didn't have a teacher, they would teach him in order to spend time with him. As the class was talking about random things since most of it was civilians, the Shinobi clan group were talking about the distinct possibility of a certain red-streaked blonde making an appearance. So what do you guys think? Asked Choji Akamichi. Choji has a rotund build and swirl markings on his cheeks similar to the rest of his clan. He currently has a red suit with plates armor on his torso, arms and upper legs while having the kanji for food on the front, shoku while also wearing tud earrings in his ears. I doubt that loser will be here, if he is even still alive. Came the arrogant voice of Sasuke Uchiha, older twin brother of Satsuki Uchiha. Sasuke has black hair with a blue tiny shaped like a duck's butt and black eyes. He is wearing dark blue pants, over which hangs a blue cloth that covers him from his stomach to his knees, which he secures with a gray rope and black shinobi sandals. Covering his torso is a gray zippered, high-collar, short-sleeved shirt with blue wrist warmers. Shut up Sasuke. Came the reply from his twin sister, Satsuki Uchiha. Satsuki looks almost exactly like her brother with some differences. She has the same color hair and eyes but, her hair is styled in a ponytail with some hair sticking out in the front, and she has soft, pink lips. She was wearing a black battle kimono similar to Naruto's but was black with white trimmings instead. She has black anbu pants on and black shinobi sandals. All of which do nothing to hide her impressive D-cup or shapely rear. Like Naruto, she also has a sword. It is a black chakudo with no guard. No one here wants to listen to you go on your little power trip, continued Satsuki, and besides, Naruto and her mom still believe he is alive, so if there is a chance, don't crush people's hope with your superiority complex. Quote. Sasuke glared at Satsuki. It is not a complex when you know that some nobody who ran away from their clan and was weak when they did is probably still weak, growled Sasuke arrogantly. Whatever floats your boat, Satsuki said, while rolling her. Before she then focused on her friend Hinata who looked like she was holding out on something. What's got you looking so nervous Hinata? Don't you think we'll pass and that Naruto will show up? Satsuki questioned which quickly got all attention on her. Hinata Hyuga is the clan heiress for the Hyuga clan. She has dark blue hair cut in a harem style reaching her lower back and shoulder-length strands framing her face. She has the traditional white eyes of the Hyuga clan with a lavender tinted to them. She wears a loose-fitting, lavender and cream hooded jacket with lavender cuffs over mesh armor that shows her well-developed G-cup. She also wears navy blue pants and black, low-heeled sandals. Hinata, upon noticing all attention was on her, from her group, blushed red, Well, I know Naruto I's alive B because he helped me out a few years ago and I saw him leave the V village then come back again during the past 6 years. Hinata said, thinking about the time they were kids and he protected her from the bullies, whilst only slightly stuttering. Quote. What? The group exclaimed somewhat quietly so as to not draw attention to themselves and leave the other conversations alone. What do you mean he left the village and came back? Asked Kira Inuzuka and Ino Yamanaka at the same time. Kira Inuzuka was the clan heiress of the Inuzuka clan only because her sister didn't want to. She has the traditional wild Inuzuka look with wild hair and slit pupils and the traditional fang tattoos on each cheek. She has thick brown hair that goes down to her upper rear, enlarged canines that jut out slightly from underneath her lips. She wears a zipped-up, hooded, sleeveless tan coat with dark brown fur lining the hood that hugs her D-cup. Black fingerless gloves that have dark brown fur also lining the wrist. Black shinobi sandals, and black, form-fitting short shorts with her ninja pouch behind her waist under her coat and sitting next to her is her Ninken partner Akamaru, who is a big white furred dog. For image of Kiba look up. Naruto Kiba gender bend, and look for the image that has a green background with white hearts and says, Kiba, in a red heart and, Shino in a green heart and that is the version I am using. Ino Yamanaka is the clan heiress of the Yamanaka clan. She has fair skin, light blue-green eyes, and platinum blonde hair that she wears in a ponytail that goes down to her waist and has bangs that cover the right half of her face with a red clip. She wears a short, sleeveless purple shirt that exposes her midriff and hugs her E-cup. She wears a purple skirt and mesh armor on her thighs, elbows and knees, with black shinobi sandals and stud earrings. Just look up her regular Shippuden outfit along with everyone else with some minor changes due to timing. I mean, he left the village 3 years ago, and he came back last week. Hinata said. So that's what you meant, said Naruto, and you say he came back last week. Hinata nodded her head before suddenly blushing bright red. Regular Hinata level blush minus the fainting, that will come later. Why are you blushing Hinata? Asked Sakura. Sakura Haruno is the daughter of a civilian councilman, however, she, along with her mother, don't share her father's views on Naruto and her family. Sakura has fair skin, short pink hair held with a white ribbon, and emerald green eyes. She wears a red sleeveless red top with white seam, that hugs against her E-cup bust. Black gloves, gray elbow protectors, low heel, knee-high boots, and black shorts that hug her impressive as underneath a short gray apron skirt. Well, stuttered Hinata, when I saw him coming back to the V village, he was wrapped in bandages, but he looked so tall and muscular. Hinata stuttered all while looking like her head was about to burst from all of the blood being pumped to it. Seriously? Yakumo asked incredulously. I mean I know it's been years since you saw him and most of us don't know him except for old pictures but I don't think he could change that much, said Yakumo. Before anyone could well, it's nice to see I don't have to say anything to get you brats to shut up anymore. Uruka said while having a teasing smile which made everyone lightly blush in embarrassment. Now, before we begin, I want to introduce a student who has been away for the past several years training and has come back today. Everyone began wondering and whispering with their neighbor on who this mysterious person was, until Uruka raised his hand and everyone stopped and paid attention. Now, I know you're all curious about who this person is, so I will just let him in now, alright? Said Uruka, before he went to open the door. Once the door was opened, they all saw who it was, and the girls began blushing, and drooling with hearts in their eyes, while the guys all glared with lousy about the red-streaked blonde that just walked in. He went to the front of the class and said with a calm smile, "Hello, everyone. My name is Naruto Uzumaki and I am going to be graduating with all of you." Quote. Before anyone could react, Naruto was tackled into a hug by a certain redhead. It's you. It's really you, cried Naruto all while still hugging her older brother who now towered over her and the rest of the class. This scene of the red-headed Ice Queen, hugging and crying over a stranger, shocked everyone and caused all the guys to get even more jealous at the fact that she was displaying affection to person. Naruto for his part was surprised at this reaction before he suddenly looked confused. He started awkwardly, who are you? He asked curious of who this redhead was and awkwardly because of the sudden display of affection. Remember he was 7 when he left, and is now 16 and has not seen his sister since then. Naruto eeped, before she hurriedly let go while blushing. This caused further shock at the redhead blushing and making such a cute sound. Naruto calmed herself and stood up straight while looking him in the eyes with a smile and said, "It's me, Naruto. Your little sister." Naruto looked confused for a brief second, which made Naruto sad, before realization struck his features and he got a big, grinning smile on his face, one that made Naruto slightly worry, before giving her a big hug, lifting her off the ground. All while shouting, "Little tomato. All of you know that if Naruto had a little sister with red hair, he would do something stupid like that." This further shocked everyone because of two things. First, he called her tomato, which no one can do without being sent to the hospital. And second, all Naruto did was blush before she began to lightly beat on his head with her cheeks puffed while shouting, "Motilda, I've told you before to not call me that. Think the reaction a chibi anime character gets when they puff their cheeks and begin flailing their arms." All Naruto did was laugh with while putting her down, so now she could only beat his chest because of the height difference. Which she now realized, feels very firm and her face was now the same color as her hair. Everyone was slack-jawed at the interaction between the two siblings, all except for the group of clan heirs and heiresses and civilian councilwoman daughter. They looked on with smiles for their friend except for two people, but both for different reasons. Shino Aburame was being his normal, expressionless self, like all Aburame, which is why he isn't smiling but he is happy for his friend. Shino is like all Aburame and show no emotion. He has bushy brown hair, narrow eyes, and is the second tallest of his class now that Naruto has arrived. He wears dark sunglasses, a sea green jacket with a high up-turned collar that hangs down to his knees, with a hood that obscures his face even more. And he has a satchel on his back. Sasuke, however, was instead sneering at Naruto for taking the attention of the girl who he believed belonged to him because she could give him strong children for the future. I know I am doing a lot of these author notes, but come on. We all know Sasuke's arrogant, emo ass would think something like that. For those who want read a story kinda like that, look up, In the Same Household, by Delt Shadow 35 or Naruto Master of Kunoichi, also by Delt Shadow 35. Both are heavy and for those who focus on that but they both do show Naruto's family being hit on by Sasuke who believes they should be with him. The guys of the group were slightly envious of his build. All of the girls however, were blushing heavily and slightly drooling. Except for Kira who, just like her sister earlier, which she will find out later, was in pseudo-heat and was currently lusting after Naruto, at least until Akamaru smacked her out of it. Literally. He smacked her in the back of the head with his tail before she wound up like her sister. Only unlike her sister, she doesn't have the control to prevent herself from trying to jump his bones. She sent a thankful look at Akamaru, with a still heavy blush on her face, which he nodded back at her as if to say, "No problem." Ino and Sakura were blushing heavily, with hearts in their eyes, about to go back to their fangirlish ways. However, before they did that, they raised their arms and smacked each other knowing that the other would do the same after they realized what was happening. They both rubbed their heads before looking at each other and nodding to the other in thanks for snapping the other out of it. Yakumo and Hinata were both standing silent, with their faces looking as if they were about to burst into fire. They both looked at each other and knew that the other was on the verge of fainting, but they ended up fainting before they could pinch each other to stop themselves from fainting. Uruka, having enough of the meet and greet, tried to get everyone to settle down. All right everyone, please settle down so we can begin. His calm voice was overruled by everyone still talking about Naruto, how hot he is, fangirls, or what his workout is to get that kind of body so they can get at ease as well, hopeless guys. I said settle down. The legendary Big Head no Jutsu was infamous for being able to quiet down even the noisiest of students. It worked its magic as the entire classroom had anticlimactically went silent, much to Uruka's pleasure. He looked over at Naruto, who was still standing and didn't even look fazed by the Big Head no Jutsu, which surprised him. Alright Naruto, now can you please take a seat over there, Uruka said while pointing at the empty seat in between Ino and Naruto. Once you've done that we can begin the WRITTEN test. Naruto calmly nodded his head before walking over to the seat and sat down. He looked over at Naruto and gave her an encouraging smile that said, "Good luck," while nodding his head before doing the same to Ino. Both of whom began to blush brightly, while all of the other girls in the class looked on with jealousy. Once Naruto was seated and everyone was quiet, Uruka passed out the papers with his assistant Mizuki, who had been glaring at Naruto ever since he walked into the classroom. "So, you've returned, demon," thought Mizuki with disgust and malice. "Now I can put my plan into action using you as the scapegoat and get the power I was promised from Orochimaru-sama for bringing him the Forbidden Scroll." Single quote. Once the test was passed out, the students were told they have half an hour to complete the test. Naruto was the first to complete the test in 5 minutes and relaxed in his seat while waiting for the time to pass. Once everyone was done, Uruka and Mizuki collected the tests and headed outside for the last 3 parts of the exam. Once they made it outside, the adults, who were waiting for the students to come outside, all began silently watching the students, while mentally cheering for their respective children or student and hoping that the demon will fail. "Alright," said Uruka, "the next part is shuriken and kunai throwing. To pass you need a total of 11 points minimum. Each shuriken and kunai that hits the target is a point and there is a way to get extra points, but I'll let you figure that part out," Uruka explained. Once that was done he began to call everyone up, one by one to get their 10 shuriken and then their 10 kunai. Once that was done, they all began to throw the shuriken and kunai at the targets, and Uruka recorded their scores. Shino Aburame. Shuriken. 6/10, kunai, 8/10. Total score. 14/20. Choji Akamichi. Shuriken. 7/10, kunai, 8/10. Total score. 15/20. Shikamaru Nara. Shuriken. 5/10, kunai, 6/10. Total score 11/20. Ino Yamanaka. Shuriken. 6/10, kunai, 7/10. Total score. 13/20. Sakura Haruno. Shuriken. 7/10, kunai, 6/10. Total score. 13/20. Yakumo Kurama sad face plus 2 points. Shuriken. 5/10, kunai, 5/10. Total score 10/20 plus 2 points equals 12/20. Kira Inazuka sad face plus 1 point. Shuriken. 7/10, kunai, 5/10. Total score. 12/20 plus 1 point equals 13/20. Hinata Hyuga sad face plus 1 point. Shuriken. 8/10, kunai, 8/10. Total score. 16/20 plus 1 point equals 17/20. Naruko Uzumaki sad face plus 2 points. Shuriken. 9/10, kunai, 8/10. Total score. 17/20 plus 2 points equals 19/20. Satsuki Uchiha sad face plus 2 points. Shuriken. 8/10, kunai, 9/10. Total score. 17 twentieths plus 2 points equals 19 twentieths. Sasuke Uchiha sad face plus 2 points. Shuriken. 9 tenths. Kunai. 10 out of 10. Total score. 19 twentieths plus 2 points equals 21 twentieths. Once Sasuke was told his score, he looked right at Naruto with a condescending look and said, HMPH, beat that loser. Naruto calmly waited with his arms crossed and only glanced at Sasuke before looking at the targets again. This was something that pissed off Sasuke because he was trying to see if could rile up Naruto in order to make him mess up, but instead, his attempts were brushed off, as if they were nothing. Alright, Naruto Uzumaki, it's your turn. Iruka called, making Naruto calmly walk over, before taking the shuriken and kunai from Mizuki. Naruto got into a stance ready to throw them. Before he threw them, however, he noticed they were blunted. Iruka-sensei, these are blunted, calmly stated Naruto, which surprised Iruka before he walked over and inspected them. Finding that Naruto was right and that they were blunted, which would make it impossible to stick to the target. Sorry about that, Naruto. Apologized Iruka, give me those and I will lend you some of mine. Iruka offered. However, he and everyone watching was surprised when Naruto shook head and said, no, it's fine. I just wanted to let you know. Alright, then if that's all, you can take your turn. Iruka said. Everyone watched as Naruto took his stance again. Naruto stood with his left foot forward, right foot back and knees bent. He had his right arm back with his hand bent in and his left arm curved in front of him. In his right hand were all of the shuriken and in his left hand were 9 of the kunai and the last was in his mouth. Everyone watched as Naruto suddenly flung his left arm back and right arm forward while at the same time throwing the shuriken. Even after he let the shuriken go, he didn't stop moving as he began to flip and jump all in place all while still spinning. Everyone watched as he continued to let the kunai fly and then he back flipped and let the last kunai go flying. Once he landed, everyone looked at the training dummies and saw that not all of the shuriken and kunai struck the targets, but were buried halfway deep in the dummies. At first, everything was silent before all of the civilian parents, students, and Sasuke started laughing at Naruto, but the only ones who stayed silent were the ones with shinobi training in the crowd and Sakura, because they knew from either experience or reading Sakura that all the spots that Naruto hits were either instant kill or fatal wounds that would kill you within seconds or minutes without medical aid. Iruka looked at all of the students laughing, and then, shut up. Iruka shouted, using the big head no jutsu, as he was getting fed up with these civilians laughing when they didn't even hear the score. After everyone stopped laughing, and paid attention to Iruka, who still looked pissed that everyone was laughing when he hadn't even said the score yet. Iruka finally calmed down, and looked at Naruto with a calm yet proud smile. Well, Naruto, began Iruka, I have to say that was by far the most amazing display of agility I have seen in a while. Thank you, said Naruto while nodding his head. Now, before I give you your score, I have to ask, said Iruka, walking over to the training dummies that still had shuriken and kunai embedded in them. Why did you throw all of the shuriken and kunai in these areas? Asked Iruka, generally curious on what Naruto's answer will be. Before Naruto could answer though, Sasuke arrogantly said, probably because he doesn't know what a target is and threw them at random. Quote. This caused a look of disappointment to cross Makoto's face, who was watching from the crowd, at her son's stupidity, and embarrassment to cross Satsuki's face at being related to such a damn dumbass. Actually, Sasuke, began Naruto, I threw them in those specific spots because every single one would have either been an instant kill upon impact, or a fatal wound that would cause death either within seconds, or minutes. Calmly stated Naruto, who then looked at Sasuke with a disappointed look on his face and said, "And the fact that you don't know that must mean you have done a piss-poor job at studying the human body for impact points that inflict the most damage." Quote. This caused everyone to look at Naruto in shock that he knew something and Sasuke didn't. Before anyone could say anything else, Iruka clapped his hands to gather everyone's attention again. Alright everyone, now that that is done, we can now move on to the taijutsu segment of the exam before finish with the jutsu section. Iruka said, as everyone began walking towards the open grounds, before Naruto remembered something. Hey, Iruka-sensei, what was Naruto's score? Naruto asked, curious on what her brother's score was, which now had everyone wondering what his total was. Iruka for his part began sheepishly laughing while rubbing the back of his neck. Oh right. How silly of me. I forgot to put it up after all of that drama. Naruto Uzumaki sad face plus 20 points. Shuriken. 10 out of 10. Kunai. 10 out of 10. Total score. 20 plus 20 points equals 40 twentieths. When everyone saw that score, they went slack-jawed at never having seen such a score before. Everyone started staring at Naruto, who was still walking to the open training grounds when he felt people staring at him. He turned around to see everyone staring at him with dropped jaws, before he shrugged his shoulders and simply said, "What?" That snapped everyone out of it before they began moving to the training grounds for their taijutsu tests. Once everyone was there, Iruka explained how he would call a student. They will then stand across from Mizuki and get ready to fight. Once Iruka starts the fight, they will continue for either 5 minutes or until Mizuki is taken down. After the rules were explained, Mizuki went to his spot and waited for everyone to be called. As everyone was called up, they began their fights. The civilian students barely passed the 5 mark, whereas, the clan heirs and heiresses, along with Sakura, were able to knock down Mizuki. Then before anyone knew it, the only ones left were the Uchiha twins and the 2 Uzumaki children. Alright, next is Satsuki Uchiha, stated Iruka. Satsuki nodded and moved to stand across from Mizuki before she got into her clan's signature, interceptor fist, taijutsu stance. Mizuki got ready as well, and when Iruka gave the signal, Mizuki charged at Satsuki, while Satsuki waited. Once Mizuki was within range, he launched a right hook at Satsuki which she blocked with her left arm and launched her right fist forward and landed a hit on his torso which sent Mizuki back AF. Before she advanced and launched kick to his head that he blocked but was a distraction for another kick to his stomach which knocked him down to the ground and she pinned him. Alright Satsuki, well done. Congratulated Iruka, your timing was perfect in waiting for Mizuki to make the opening move which is beneficial to your clan's style which requires patience and timing before blocking or dodging and counter-attacking. Iruka explained, which Satsuki listened to closely and then bowed while saying, "Thank you," and then she walked back over to the other students and sat down next to Naruto before sending her a look that said, "Beat that." Naruto saw the look and bristled before waiting patiently and anxiously for her turn. Next is Naruto Uzumaki, said Iruka. Naruto got up and walked over to stand across from Mizuki, before she got in her stance which had her standing with her left foot forward, right leg back, knees slightly bent. Left arm crossed forward with her left elbow pointing in Mizuki's direction and her left hand open as if to perform a chop, and her right arm at her hip and her right hand closed into a fist. Once Iruka started the fight, she charged at Mizuki and launched a left roundhouse at his head, which he below. CKED using both arms but was not ready for her right leg that came up when she performed a backflip kick that landed on his chin as he was knocked down. She then proceeded to pin his arms behind his back with her knee before grabbing his chin and the crown of his head with her hands effectively previous. Ending any movement. Alright Naruto, excellent job, Iruka said, signaling Naruto to stand back up after letting go of Mizuki and look at Iruka. That was a very good job of taking your opponent's attention away and having it focus on a specific movement before using another move to take down your opponent. And the way you pinned him was one of the most effective pins, as it takes away the use of your opponent's arms and gives you the chance to easily snap his neck, which takes away any thoughts of attempting to escape. Quote. Thank you, Uruka-sensei, said Naruto, before she walked back to the students and looked at Satsuki with a smug look that made Satsuki bristle this time. Alright, Sasuke Uchiha, you're up. Sasuke simply hef it, before moving into position, also standing in his clan's taijutsu stance. Uruka started the match and Sasuke charged at Mizuki, who launched a kick at Sasuke's head, but that was blocked, and Sasuke then sent several punches towards Mizuki's torso, before tripping him, and pinning him. Alright Sasuke, that's enough, said Uruka, causing Sasuke to look at him and then get up. That was an excellent way of turning your family's interceptor fist into an offensive fighting style, but that was far too much aggression that was used in your advance. Try to control that temper of yours. Uruka explained, causing Sasuke to sneer at him before walking back to the other students, ignoring everyone while glaring at Naruto. He was still upset that he didn't react to his tauntings earlier. And finally, Naruto Uzumaki, said Uruka with a calm smile. Naruto simply nodded and stood up before making his way over across from Mizuki, who began glaring at him. Naruto boredly looked at Mizuki, which pissed him off, before taking out a red headband with black flames and tying it around his ear. Yes, shocking everyone, before calmly crossing his arms across his chest, which made them look bigger. This made Sasuke and Mizuki believe he has given up, but confused Uruka. Naruto, aren't you going to get ready? Uruka asked, completely confused on Naruto's actions, as well as everyone else except for Mizuki, Sasuke, and the civilian villagers, who all believed he had given up and was going to simply stand there and take his beating like the demon he is. I am ready, answered Naruto calmly. I simply have no need to use my eyes for this fight because he won't land a finger me. Naruto said, while pointing at Mizuki, causing everyone to think he was either that confident or that arrogant in his abilities, but caused Mizuki to get pissed off. Oh. K. Uruka replied slowly, still a little unsure if Naruto was that strong, but he wasn't here to question the boy, so he simply started the match. So, you really think I won't be able to land a finger on you, huh? Sneered Mizuki, thinking that the demon should have just died somewhere in a hole and never returned. I don't think you won't land a finger on me, I know you won't, calmly replied Naruto, not moving an inch. Oh yeah. Well, we'll see about that. Mizuki shouted before charging at Naruto, who continued to stand there. Once Mizuki was in range, he launched a kick towards Naruto's head. Mizuki began thinking that he hit him when the kick was only an inch away, until suddenly, he was staring at the sky. Mizuki was confused on what just happened, while everyone else was as well. All they saw was Mizuki about to kick Naruto in the head, and then suddenly he's on the floor laying on his back. The only one who wasn't confused was Kushina, because she knew what had happened and had wide eyes. Which was not missed by the rest of her group. Kushina, what just happened? Questioned Hitomi, as she had caught part of what happened, but all she really saw was a blur of movement before the scene before them appeared. The group of adults looked at Kushina, who looked on with mixture of surprise, pride, and curiosity, as Naruto continued to stand in the same place in the same position while Mizuki slowly began to get up from the floor behind him, where he was previously lying down. What happened was that Naruto made his move. Kushina said, which confused the group as they hadn't seen him move from his spot. But he's still in the same spot, so how could he have made his move? Asked a confused Sum, who recently returned with Hana after they changed and got a hold of Tem's elves. Kushina shook her head at them with a proud smile and explained, it's not that he didn't move, It's just that he moved so fast, that to everyone watching, it looked like Mizuki just suddenly appeared on the floor. Kushina explained, being the only one to be able to move that fast other than Naruto himself, making the group's eyes widen at that. Flashback to moments ago. Sensing Mizuki's foot about to hit him, Naruto smoothly raised his arm, grabbed Mizuki's ankle and flipped him over his shoulder to the ground without moving from his spot. Flashback end. How is he able to move that fast though? Sume asked the question that was on all of their minds. Kushina then looked deep in thought while still looking at Naruto, who still had not moved from his spot or changed his stance. The only way I know of to get that fast is to go through years of intense gravity training, but even then, it's not something that a regular teenager can attempt with being destroyed by the training. Kushina said, momentarily forgetting that Naruto was not a regular teenager. What about the fox? Hitomi asked, reminded the group, who all then went wide-eyed at that information. Sume was the first to react. You're right. With the fox being sealed inside of him, giving him its regenerative properties, and his crazy stamina, he would be able to adjust to any training GI. Then within in a few hours and at most a few days. Sume said, realizing that Naruto would be able to withstand the great amounts of pressure and weight needed to get the training done and still be alive and well. Back with Naruto. Naruto still stood in his spot waiting for Mizuki to get up and try to attack him again. Mizuki got up and glared at Naruto for the embarrassment he is going through. What did you do? Exclamation mark quote. Shouted Mizuki, wondering what Naruto did so he could get his power, with Sasuke listening closely, wondering the same thing for the same reason. Answering calmly, Naruto said, I just moved and flipped you over my shoulder when you attacked and were within my range. Quote. Mizuki got mad thinking Naruto was making fun of him, and shouted, lies. You never moved. Of course I did, Naruto calmly replied, I just moved so fast that you didn't register what happened. I can move slower if you want so that Iruka can see that I am using taijutsu and so that you can't see. Complain that I am cheating. This pissed off Mizuki thinking that Naruto was making fun of him, and this caused him to start attacking at a random and wild pace. All the while, everyone saw that Naruto was only dodging and redirecting the attacks, which surprised everyone at the level of skill that he was using. While this was going on, the rest of the group, that will later be known as the Rookie 12, were watching with amazed expressions, except for Shino, for obvious reasons, and Sasuke, who was glaring at Naruto while trying to memorize his moves and techniques, but they were too random and erratic to be copied. Naruto, who had finally had enough, decided to end the fight in the easiest way possible for him that would still provide power. Naruto reared his right hand over his left shoulder and backhanded Mizuki across the grounds and straight into the wall of the academy, where only the bottom half of Mizuki could be seen with the random twitching of his legs, showing that he was knocked out. The adults and shinobi stared in amazement and shock at the level of strength needed to accomplish such a feat. The students were looking on with the same reactions, with Sasuke looking on in jealousy at the strength and power that Naruto had. Holy shit. He just gave Mizuki the godly bitch slap. One of the male students exclaimed in shock. After this little display of power, Mizuki was removed from the wall and sent to the hospital where he would be healed and returned in an hour, so the students were given this hour as a chance to take a break and talk with each other, with their family coming over to talk as well. The group of the future Rookie 12 all went and talked with their family except for Sasuke, who went and brooded by a tree. As Naruto was talking with his sister, he was unaware of a group of people who were coming up to the both of them. Hello again, Sochi, said a voice behind Naruto that caused him to go wide-eyed and slowly look behind him to see his mother staring back at him with a loving smile and nothing but love and pride in her eyes. Hello again, Ka-san, replied Naruto, still staring at her in shock at how she was looking at him. How have you been, Sochi? Kushina asked, wanting to know how her son has been the past several years, along with everyone else. I've been good, Naruto said with a smile, having snapped out of his shock. What have you been up to for all these years, Naruto-kun? Makoto asked, wondering what he has done over the years along with the rest of the group and their children. Well, I've just been training and living in the Forest of Death, where I got a bunch of pets, and I actually came back to the village on 2 occasions. Naruto said, making everyone look at him, wondering when he did and why. When did you come back, Naruto-kun? Asked Sume, which got Naruto to smirk at her, which made all of them to blush at how handsome he looked before he looked at Makoto and Hitomi. Well, haven't you ever wondered how Aunt Makoto is a survivor or how Hitomi survived her illness? Naruto asked, which got everyone to look at him in surprise. Wait, said Makoto and Hitomi, you're the reason why we're still alive. Yeah, Naruto started to explain. I was in the village, planning on getting some minor revenge on the Yondaime by spraying itching powder in his office through the vents, when I heard him along with those old advisors summon Itachi. I was curious about what was going on, so I decided to sit still and listen in on what was going on. As I was listening, I heard them ask Itachi how the issue with the Uchiha clan was going. When he said that the issue had gotten worse, the advisors told him that since it didn't get better, to simply eliminate them. Makoto was horrified at what she heard. Then Naruto continued his tale. When I heard this, I was so shocked that they would even suggest something like this, even Itachi looked shocked before he looked at the Yondaime with a little hope in his eyes that he wouldn't go through with the order. But the Yondaime proved him wrong when he approved of the order instead. Itachi tried to bargain for the lives of the children and your life, Makoto, but the Yondaime said that only Sasuke and Satsuki would be allowed to live. I heard that and remembered the times that you helped me out with some food, so I got out of there as quickly as possible without making noise and rushed over to the Uchiha compound, but when I got there, everyone was already dead. I then sensed Itachi and you in the main house, so turned off my gravity seals that I had on at the time and rushed over just in time to save you, but because I couldn't control my speed at the time, I dropped you off at one of the training ground in your compound and then rushed back to the forest. Naruto finished, getting a surprised and grateful look from Makoto, who smiled at him, which he replied back to with a smile of his own. Once he had finished, everyone, other than Makoto, looked at him in shock before he then looked over at Hitomi and began the next tale. The second time I came back to village, I had actually been traveling kinda close to the Hyuga compound, when I overheard one of those pompous windbags your clan call elders talking about how you've been a threat to their ways and how after tonight the poison would take effect and make it seem like your heart had simply stopped in your sleep. Hitomi was shocked at hearing how the clan elders of her clan would try and plan this. Hearing this, I snuck into your clan compound, into the elders' rooms, looking for what the poison was, when I found that it was a plant that makes your body grow weaker when continuously taken in small amounts over the years. I then went back to the forest and gathered all of the plants I knew that when taken by themselves did nothing, but when mixed together they become an amazing medicine that can expel almost any abnormal effects within your body. Naruto finished his tale, getting amazed looks from everyone at his level of plant knowledge. Hey Naruto? Asked Hana with Kira standing next to her. Naruto turned to her, showing she now had his attention, which caused the reaction of her and her sister blushing at the calm look in his eyes that showed hidden strength. Yes, Naruto said, while tilting his head to the side, which got the group to twitch and mentally shout, kawaii tilde. How did you know what plants were poisonous and when mixed, create a strong medicine instead of a stronger poison? Hana asked. Naruto then looked sheepish before saying, well, I knew they were poisonous because when I started living in the forest, I was looking for food and couldn't find any. This got the group to look at him with sadness for what he went through, with looks of guilt crossing over Naruto's ND Kushina's faces for not doing more for him. Naruto saw these looks and felt bad because he knew his mom and sister weren't to blame for how Minato treated him. Naruto then felt worse realizing the effect what he was about to say next would have on them. So, I just began eating a group of random plants near me, which about a minute later, I fell to the ground seizing up until I passed out. I then woke up the next day alive and well and figured that Kurami cured my body of the poison. Naruto continued, but before he could continue, Satsuki had caught something when he spoke and decided to ask the question on her mind. However, before she could, Uruka came back and asked all students to come back for the jutsu portion of the exam. Hearing this, the students went back to the field where they all began performing the academy jutsu. Finally, when it was Naruto's turn, he performed the kawarimi and the hench perfectly before surprising everyone when he performed the shadow clone jutsu and made 3 solid clones instead of the regular clone, thus, allowing him to pass as well. Later, the group of women and Naruto had gone to Kushina's house in order to celebrate for successfully becoming shinobi of the village. However, before they all went in, they noticed that Naruto had stopped before the gate entrance. The whole group was wondering why he stopped, when Kushina walked up to him and told him, "It's okay, Naruto. You can come in. You can come home." Hearing those words, the group then realized why he had stopped. He was afraid of being rejected again and didn't want to risk the chance that he could have a family again. As for Naruto, he began tearing up when he heard those words and then lunged forward and gave his mom a hug while saying, "I'm home, Ka-san." Kushina then smiled, while also crying and said, "Welcome home, Sochi-kun." Quote. The group all began to have tears in their eyes as well, watching as Naruto had finally reconnected with his mother. Before they could all head in, however, Naruto suddenly tensed and turned in the direction of the forest with a serious face. This was not missed by the rest as they were wondering why he was looking in that direction, when suddenly, Naruto began jumping in that direction. Everyone was surprised by his actions and began jumping after him, but they were surprised to see that when they jumped onto a roof, Naruto had already entered the forest, which surprised them all as to how fast he was. They snapped out of it when, a few minutes later, they suddenly felt a huge wave of power come from the forest and then a loud boom with an explosion causing smoke to go high up into the air. Worried for her son, Kushina then began rushing to the forest at her top speed, which snapped everyone else out of their shock and decided to follow. With every one of them thinking, "I hope Naruto's okay." When they all got there, they were surprised to find an enormous crater, with Naruto holding the village's forbidden scroll of seals upright in his left hand, a giant shuriken with a broken point stabbed into a tree, and Mizuki kneeling on the ground away from Naruto, clutching his right shoulder because of the missing arm that was laying on the ground away from Mizuki and was bent at all sorts of angles, showing that it would have been broken beyond repair and immensely painful if it was still attached. But another surprise was when they looked at Naruto. He had what looked like gold covering his arms from the tip of his fingers all the way to his shoulders with markings all over his arms, and a fierce, angry look on his face. Then they heard him growl, "I'm going to make you pay for what you did to Uruka-sensei and what you said about my family." They then began wondering what had happened before they arrived. 5 minutes before the group arrived, Naruto had sensed Mizuki's chakra moving rapidly from the Hokage tower, and was confused before he then sensed Uruka's chakra meeting Mizuki's before they started pulsing as if they were fighting, when Uruka's suddenly began to drop. This had alarmed him and he decided to see what happened, so he moved at high speeds across the village into the forest and found Uruka. He was shocked to see Uruka laying on the ground in a small puddle of blood, with a giant shuriken sticking out of his back. Naruto rushed over and checked to see if he was still alive and was relieved that he was. Naruto removed the shuriken from Uruka's back and then used a minor healing jutsu to stop the bleeding. With Uruka out of danger, Naruto turned in the direction of Mizuki and disappeared, where he then reappeared in front of Mizuki and saw him holding Konoha's forbidden scroll of seals with a giant shuriken on his back, similar to the one used on Iruka. Mizuki was surprised to see Naruto appear in front of him so suddenly, but then, what luck! I get to steal the village scroll and kill the demon brat. Mizuki thought with malice. He then pulled the other shuriken from his back and got ready to throw it. He then shouted, "Die demon!" and let loose the shuriken towards Naruto. He believed that the injuries he received earlier from Naruto were a bunch of flukes. However, Naruto surprised him when he simply backhanded the shuriken with his bare fist, causing a point to break and the shuriken to go spinning wildly before lodging itself in a tree. So my suspicion of you was right, you were planning something, said Naruto calmly. To think you would attempt to steal the village's forbidden scroll and attempt to murder Iruka-sensei. What? Shouted Mizuki. What do you mean, demon? You mean to say Iruka is still alive? Exclamation mark quote. Is that not what I just said? Naruto asked rhetorically. Man, who knew you were evil and stupid? This made Mizuki mad, so he decided to try and enlighten Naruto to a little secret the village had hidden from him. Hey, did you ever wonder why the villagers hate you? Asked Mizuki, which caused Naruto to raise an eyebrow in curiosity. Seeing this, Mizuki continued, you see, 16 years ago, the Kyuubi no Yoko had attacked the village. The village did its best to fight off the Kyuubi, but we couldn't kill, so the Yondaime decided to seal it up in 2 children. Don't you see, he decided to seal it up in you and your demon whore of a sister. Mizuki saw Naruto had lowered his head and that his eyes were now shadowed. Thinking that he had an opening, Mizuki took a kunai out and began charging at Naruto in order to stab him in the head. However, when he was halfway there, he sensed a large amount of chakra suddenly coming from above him and looked up to see Naruto with a face of rage, his arms covered in gold from his shoulders to his fingers with markings all over them and his right arm back to launch an attack. Naruto then launched his arm forward to strike Mizuki. This caused a massive explosion to occur, and when the smoke cleared, it revealed a massive crater in the ground with Mizuki kneeling and clutching his shoulder because he was missing his right arm, which was several meters away and bent in all sorts of angles, showing that it was used to try and block the attack but was completely shattered and severed by the tremendous force from the punch. It then showed Naruto, who was standing while holding the scroll with his left hand and his still clenched right fist, with both still covered in gold. This was what the group saw when they showed up and heard what Naruto said. They then saw Naruto look over at them with a fierce but calm look on his face, which made him look even more handsome and caused them all to blush. They snapped out of it when they saw Naruto toss the scroll towards them, which was caught by Naruto. They then heard Naruto speak, hold that until the Anbu show up while I deal with this traitor. They then saw Naruto turn back to Mizuki before he stepped forward and suddenly disappeared from view. Everyone in the clearing began looking for him, the women in curiosity and Mizuki in fear, before they heard a large boom and felt a shockwave and turned to see Naruto had just uppercut Mizuki with enough force to cause a shockwave of air before Mizuki was launched into the air. Naruto watched Mizuki for a second, before he then stepped forward again with his right foot forward and bent his leg before jumping after Mizuki with so much force, the ground shattered and sent another shockwave. He then appeared above Mizuki with his ready to launch a kick but was covered in what looked like a black metallic material. Then they saw Naruto loose his kick with a shout of, "Savage Blade Kick." Once Naruto's kick made contact with Mizuki's body, there was a big flash of black energy with a red outline that caused everyone to shield their eyes from the big blast of wind that suddenly blasted through when Mizuki made contact with the ground, also causing the ground to crater even more. The dust began to settle, allowing the group to see that Mizuki had been blown deep into the ground and was actually severed in half at the waist. They heard multiple people landing in the clearing and turned around to reveal Minato, several Anbu, and what looked like a young woman with red hair and slitted eyes. The Anbu and Minato all looked surprised at the damage, and the woman appeared to be very proud for some reason. Before anyone could say anything, they then heard a loud crash and turned to see that it was Naruto who had landed and was currently crouched with his eyes shadowed before he stood, with his arms at his sides and slightly back, with his left hand slightly clenched and his right hand in a complete fist, and his mouth open to allow steam to be leaking from the corners of his mouth, and his eyes were revealed and they showed massive amounts of power and strength in them. To all of the men, they were envious of how badass Naruto looked, and to the women, they were all blushing up a storm and feeling slightly wet, very in the cases of Anko, Hana, Sum, and Kira, at how powerful and handsome he looked. He then relaxed his stance and breathed deeply before releasing it to finally calm down and turn towards the current audience. Before anyone could say anything, however, the young women with red slitted eyes glomped Naruto while shouting his name and then shocked everyone when she kissed him on the lips while wrapping her arms around his neck, and they saw him returning it while wrapping his arms around her waist. Naruto, who was feeling immensely jealous of the girl, along with all of the other women present, stepped forward and shouted, "Hey! Who are you and why are you kissing my brother?" The young women broke the kiss and let go of Naruto as he did the same, and she turned around and looked at the group before answering, "Why, I'm his mate, of course, so why wouldn't I be allowed to kiss him?" she asked rhetorically. Minato then stepped forward and said, "What is your name?" The young women sneered at him before saying, well, if it isn't the garbage Yondaime. I haven't seen you in since you sealed me away. Quote. This received looks of surprise before Minato shouted, "Who are you and how do you me?" The young woman simply chuckled before replying, "I know you because you sealed me away 16 years ago, and as for who I am." Once she said that, the young woman was then covered in a puff of smoke that cleared and revealed the woman still standing there, but with fox ears on top of her head and 9 tails swishing behind her body, all covered in reddish-orange fur with black fur tips. "My name is Kurami, the Kyuubi no Yoko, and mate to Naruto Uzumaki, one of the Yonko, 4 emperors, and reincarnation of the god of wrath, Asura, and reincarnation of Ashura, one of the 2 sons of the Sage of 6 Paths." The group was wide-eyed at hearing that this was the Kyuubi and that she was the mate of Naruto, who, even though they didn't understand what one of those titles mean, they understood too. Naruto was the reincarnation of one the sons of the Sage of 6 Paths and of a god of wrath. Nobody knew what to do now, but one thing was for certain. They would never get on Naruto's bad side.